that they were like the most worthless characters in the whole thing. Greetings, Wanderer. This is Atlas here, and welcome to the Void. Today I'm going to be making a commentary about the first season of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. In this commentary, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts in regards to many different aspects of this animated series. In regards to the writing, the story of both parts that are part of the first season, which is Phantom Blood and Battle Tendencies. About the characters, some of the flaws that I consider the anime has, at least in this first season, and some of the strong, highlights that it also has. Like I said before, this is the first time that I've watched this anime, so this is going to be more sort of a first impressions. But I already have discussed a little bit of this in a JoJo's Discord hangout that I did with my Patreon members, in which we discussed these very same things. So some of the things that I discussed in that hangout, I'm also going to be bringing forward in this commentary, right? So the way I'm going to be doing this is I am going to be breaking the season in two parts, like overall, of course. I'm going to be talking first about Phantom Blood, and then I'm going to jump and talk about Battle Tendencies, all right? So with that being said, let's just jump straight into Phantom Blood, all right? Let's talk about the story / writing of the first part of the season, right? Okay, the first thing that I would like to talk about in regards to Phantom Blood is it's the story, of course, the writing and the story / writing / story of it, because I think it is a very traditionally told, in the sense that it's very black and white. It's a very traditionally a story about good versus evil. You have, of course, Jonathan, which represents all that's good and pure and honorable about human beings. He's basically like more than a character. He's more like a symbol, and I'm going to be talking more in depth about that later when I'm talking about the characters. And we have obviously Dio, which is obviously the embodiment of evil in the first part, in Phantom Blood. Since it's a very traditional way of storytelling, of course, it's very easy to understand. It's very relatable, because this sorts of stories have been told over and over again through thousands of years. I would even dare to say it's that sort of storytelling structure is it's so ubiquitous within our culture worldwide, because it's not, I wouldn't say it's like a Western culture thing or an Eastern culture thing. This is shared among all cultures, in the way we have been telling stories since we were just nomads, when civilization didn't even really started. We were telling those kind of stories since then, maybe, who knows. But yeah, it's like a very easy to understand, ubiquitous kind of way to tell the story. However, in that regard, of course, that's also comes as a flaw, because it's like, well, it's done before. So it's, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that at least from that part, there's nothing particularly interesting that it's going to be derived or that is going to branch out from a very defined way of telling a story. But that doesn't mean that it takes from the entertainment value or on the and the interesting characters in the story that is within that box, let's say. Because at the end of the day, I would say, although JoJo's Bizarre Adventure takes a lot of liberties in regards to going outside of that box, the storytelling itself in the first part is still very, down to the roots of storytelling. It's a good versus evil, and it's very clear. Okay, so now let's talk about the characters from Phantom Blood, okay? I would like to start talking about Jonathan himself. I think that, like I said before, Jonathan is not just a character. Like I said before, he's a symbol as well as Dio. Jonathan and Dio serve as symbols, and that's even above, or beyond of being just a character in a story overall, And the reason I say this is it's because I would say to a lesser degree on Dio, but certainly to the maximum effect on Jonathan, they are not believable characters, in the sense that I think that Jonathan, being the symbol of all that is honorable, pure, and the best, and has the best traits of humanity, let's say, no one is like that in real life. Absolutely no one. So that's why I think it's less of a believable character, but more of a believable symbol. You could arguably say that one of his flaws would be like being naive, because he's so pure-hearted and always wants to do the right thing and the good thing for everybody. However, of course, in real life, all those things also have like a flaw within it, And if you were to be like Jonathan on the real life, I think that would be impossible, but just let's try to stretch our imagination a little bit and say like, well, yeah, that maybe would be like possible. It would be unbearable. I mean, that is so much so that, when Dio kills his dog, he still has this odd bonding nature to Dio, being sort of his stepbrother, where he doesn't despise him or hate him, even though Dio did absolutely horrible things, like he killed his dog, he tainted his future girlfriend, wife, by kissing her first, which was a super juvenile, of course, very, very comedic relief kind of thing. But ultimately, he wanted to kill his father too, which he would end being his stepfather too. So he tried to kill his stepfather, Dio, or Jonathan's father. And even though he went to those lengths, in his evil acts, Jonathan still didn't hate him or whatsoever. He still felt like a bond and sort of compassion towards him, because somehow he knew that Dio wasn't evil just because, which is why I say Dio is, to a lesser degree, sort of a more believable character, but still very much symbolic in terms of the evil side of the story. Because with Jonathan, we have that, you can see, for example, that when Jonathan's father goes and visits Dio's father in prison, he realizes that he's just a petty criminal. He wasn't, when they had that accident, he wasn't really trying to save his life whatsoever. He was trying to actually just rob them. He realized this in the prison, but still he considered that he saved his life, but also had that very same compassion towards him. And that's kind of the trait that Jonathan, carry into himself from his father. I think that he didn't carry from his father was like this severe character, Jonathan's father could be sometimes very punishing in that regard. But like I said before, him being the symbol of hope and you know all these very desirable traits, good desirable traits in human beings, he didn't carry that severe punishment kind of thing from his father, but he carried the best thing from his father, which was the compassion thing. Now with Dio, it's different, and the reason why I say it's more of a believable character is because we get to see more of a relationship that he has with his father, and we understand more why he is the way he is. Like this absolute sadistic wretch, you know, out for blood and vengeance upon the world. Because ultimately, it's not like he's against only the Joestars. No. He was on a rampage for blood and vengeance against the whole world. And you know, having a father like he had, it's more of you understand more why he is the way he is. However, I think that even though the relationship with his father explains a little bit more than the relationship that Jonathan has with his father in regards to more how believable the characters are, still Dio is ultimately the, you know, the either the emancipation of evil or the embodiment of it. And that solidifies when he acquires the powers of the mask, when he puts the mask on, and so on and so forth. Now I would like to talk about some of the supporting characters and how they affect or not the at least the story in the first part. Let's talk about Zeppeli for a second. It would have been more believable that Jonathan had like that kind of you know, teacher, mentor kind of character in the anime in the first part, if he wasn't so OP. Because okay, let me put this into a context, all right? When Dio puts the mask on, he's supposed to be like insanely powerful, you know? And still he was defeated by Jonathan, and Jonathan at the moment when, you know, when the mansion is you know, that's when Jonathan's father was killed, and you know, all hell breaks loose and whatnot. Jonathan was not under the tutelage of Zeppelin, so he didn't know how to master the Hammond or whatnot. He was basically like a teenager, you know, fighting with a super powerful evil teenager. So, you know, the power balance was insanely different, and still Jonathan was able to come on top in that fight. That's one of the flaws that I think the character has in the first part, because I don't know if it's trying to tell like in a metaphorical way that you don't need the Hammond, but you just need to be a good person to be OP over the evil characters or evil in general, or he just basically needed to survive because of plot armor reasons, you know. He's the main character, so he needs to survive, and that's it. That's the only explanation we get from him surviving, not only surviving, just defeating Dio, plain and simple, which to me was absolutely overpowered for his character, at least in the beginning, because like I said before, he wasn't under the tutelage of Zeppelin. He didn't learn anything about hammer and whatnot, and still he came out victorious. I think he would have been more believable or more interesting if he was able to defeat Dio somehow, but still had to sacrifice something. Now, you could argue that he sacrificed, you know, his whole family and whatnot. Okay, that's fair enough. But at the end of the day, that sacrifice didn't come from himself. Like, that was going to happen either way. It was out of his hands, you know what I mean? So I think it would have been better if Jonathan sacrificed something to be able to at least win that battle, because it's not like Dio was defeated, ultimately, but he won that battle. Jonathan won the battle at the end, so that's kind of an issue that I have in terms of a story. I think Jonathan is too OP, too overpowered from the beginning. Another thing that I find interesting is that Jonathan, it's like a beacon, or it's like the calling, and Dio is not so much. And what I'm trying to say with this is that you get to see how Jonathan gets more people interested in his cause and who he is, but he been himself. But Dio actually has to force people to, join his ranks, either by converting them into vampires and whatnot, or playing just mind games or blackmailing people. But I think for the most part, he's just basically doing it by force, by basically turning people into vampires and whatnot. But Jonathan converts people like he's like Jesus or something. Because speaking of that, let's talk about Speedwagon, which was like this very petty criminal, and just by watching the demeanor and how Jonathan acted when he found him in in the streets of the city, he suddenly had a change of heart. He was moved by Jonathan overall. That's I know this might be like nitpicking, of course, but that would never happen in real life. Like Speedwagon first was focused, like he already made the decision that he was going to kill Jonathan in that corridor, in that street on the city. And suddenly he had the change of heart. Of course, he wouldn't have been able to, because Jonathan is OP from the very beginning, and he defeated Dio with the mask powers from the beginning. So there was no way in hell that Speedwagon was going to be able to do anything to him. But still, in a more believable, let's say, a scenario, he would have never ever had a change of heart. But in this case, the character has had it for some reason. I don't know if the writers decided that to give Jonathan, like a companion, because that's what Speedwagon is at the end. Ultimately, apologies, he becomes his best friend, and ultimately his companion in terms of giving him, I don't know, sometimes he becomes like more of a cheerleader than anything else, because he can't fight, and he's there more of a Speedwagon is sometimes more of a secondary character that it's supposed to give Jonathan some sort of comfort as a best friend and so on and so forth. But to me, Jonathan seems so OP from the beginning that he could have done all that he did without the help of Speedwagon. I think Speedwagon becomes more relevant to the story in the second part, in Battle Tendencies. But in this first part, it seemed like he wasn't adding too much to the storytelling of the whole thing. Like the most thing that you see him doing is explaining things, or that time where Zeppelin got his arm frozen, he helped to unfroze it. Like that was like the most involved he was in fights. But of course, you don't need characters that are always fighting. That's okay if he wasn't able to fight. But somehow he felt like sometimes unnecessary. Like I didn't feel too much of an influence from him in the first part, at least. Now, some of my favorite supporting characters in the first part were Tarkus and Bruford. And the reason why that is because they actually get some love, in the story of the first part. They actually tell you who they were before they were resurrected by Dio to be used as pawns basically to defeat Jonathan and his companions. I loved how gruesome this story is, and how that very sense of the betrayal that they felt, when they got their when they were executed. That sense of the betrayal that they felt just before they died, they carried that thirst for vengeance and setting the world on fire after they died, and of course after being resurrected they still had that. And that is absolutely perfect because, like I said before, Dio had the same despite towards humanity. He wanted to set the world on fire and probably convert each and every human being into vampires and have his will over the planet and whatnot. Tarkus and Bruford did the same thing. They were the perfect candidates to do his bidding because of that traumatic event. Now, to finalize my commentary for the first part, for Phantom Blood, I would like to say that even though there was no doubt in my mind that Jonathan was going to come on top in the final battle against Dio, I did not expect him to die at all. That was absolutely unexpected. In a sense, it felt like very intrusive because at least for the experience that I had with the anime, I felt like I still had more to learn about the character. Even though he was, very easy to understand in the sense that he's a symbol and that's what he is. He represents all that's good and honorable and whatnot about humankind. I still felt that there was more to the character than that, or maybe let me rephrase that. Maybe I wanted that to happen, but that just didn't happen. So maybe it was just like me wanting something that is not there. Okay, maybe that could be the case. But him dying and Dio dying also at the same time, basically, was an interesting turn of events. At first, I wasn't really happy with the way the Phantom Blood ended, but then it grew on me, how it ended. Of course, Irina having the child of Jonathan and also adopting another child, which was very interesting, that part, of course. From saving the other child from the boat. I think it was an interesting turn of events that, of course, bleeds into the second part, which we are going to be talking now. Okay, so let's talk about battle tendencies, all right? Let's talk about the story and the story / writing of this part first, and then we can talk about the characters and some of the flaws that I consider for the second part, or some of the highlights, best parts of it. I think that overall Battle Tendencies has a way more interesting story, a way more interesting characters, and way more believable characters. So in general, I think Battle Tendencies is where it's I like the second part way more than Phantom Blood for those specific reasons. The threat of the Pillar Man was, of course, a one-up to the threat that was Dio. Dio was of course a threat to humanity, but in comparison to the Pillar Man, he was dwarfed absolutely. It was a massive power creep in regards to the amount of to the amount of the threat that the characters or the Hamon masters, let's say, are facing in battle tendencies. So in that regard, there's also like stories within stories, you know, like some of the characters have their main story, but from themselves they branch other stories. Like for example, Joseph, the story of Joseph's mother, Elizabeth. That's a story that branches out, not. And of course it branches from himself if you take the second part isolated, but it's the one that bleeds out from the first part at the end, because of course I forgot to say that this commentary was going to be full of spoilers, but yeah, Elizabeth is at the end Joseph's mother, which you know, from the beginning we only see Irina, which is Joseph's grandmother. And you know, when I was watching the second part, I didn't really wonder too much about who Joseph's parents were, because I thought like, well, they are not in the picture yet, but he had Irina and Speedwagon that also became like sort of a father figure to him, I would say. And Irina, of course, being the mother figure. Although they are not their biological mother and father, they served as he grew up as those figures. So I suppose that I didn't mind it too much that he didn't have, or at least that his mother and father were not mentioned until later in the point of the anime. But I didn't think too much about it at the beginning, of course. We have that story branching out. We also have the story of Caesar branching out, you know, from his previous. It was like a legacy, you know. He was basically explaining how he wanted to carry on the mission that his previous, let's say his ancestors, his forefathers had, you know, the same, and he took to his heart the same effervescent mission to the ultimate consequence, of course, which we're going to be talking later. But yes, we also have that story branching out. Of course, Elizabeth also has her own story that is interconnected with the branching story of Joseph. So I think overall, of course, the characters being more believable and, you know, the story being way more interesting, more is at risk, more is at stake. And ultimately, you know, this is a family story. You know, it's a story about a family. I was actually comparing this a little bit to Star Wars, because Star Wars, it's ultimately a family story, you know. It's about fathers and sons, mothers, brothers. It's close to that in that regard. You know, a story of fathers. I think the first part is about fathers and sons. The second part is about mothers and sons. And I don't know what's going to happen on the second season, which I am about to embark on that very soon. Which, by the way, I do reactions and breakdowns of the animes in my Patreon. So if you're interested, the link to that is going to be in the description of this video. And soon I'm going to be starting doing reactions slash breakdowns of the second season of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. So now that I have started, you know, talking a little bit about the characters themselves, let's start about the characters more in detail. Let's start with Joseph, you know, the main character. At the beginning, I wasn't able to really get him, because he is like the absolute. I'm not going to say that he's the absolute opposite, but he is a very different character from Jonathan. And of course, he is like the I don't want to say the successor, but he's basically like Jonathan was the main character along with Dio from the first part, and Joseph becomes like the main character of the second part. But they are radically different characters. The only thing that I would say Joseph has that is comparable to Jonathan is that Joseph has the same sort of naiveness to himself, even though he's like this streetwise kind of character, which goes very well in regards to where he is and you know the time period he is, because one of the interesting things about this character Joseph is that, you know, he grew up in New York City in the 30s, or even before that maybe, but it's 1939 when he's fighting the Pillar Men and whatnot. So, you know, let's put it that way, like in the 30s, 1930s. He's not a poor lad, you know. The Joestar family was rich from the beginning. Of course, I would assume that Irina inherited that from Jonathan, and Jonathan inherited that from his father, and so on and so forth. So he wasn't necessarily poor at all. But for some reason, he is this kind of character that looked for... that got into trouble all the time. You know what I mean? Those kind of characters that, despite their life circumstances, they like to be... to get themselves into trouble. So... even though we don't see a lot of that from Joseph, because we don't see how he grows up from being a child and whatnot, being in New York City at that time is certainly very interesting. New York City was at the time and later became, like from that time and later on, became like, or was like a super insanely immigration hub, you know, like people from all over the world immigrated to New York City. So it was like a melting pot of different cultures, different ways of thinking, and so on and so forth. And when you have that in a fairly close space, let's say, there's going to be trouble, of course. There's going to be differences, and that's going to maybe lead to some conflict that sometimes it goes just beyond respecting each other's space. It goes towards fighting and, you know, war even within the city. So that sense of struggle and conflict that is within the city translates a little bit into why Joseph is the way he is. Even though he's a rich kid, he went out to the streets, he experienced New York, and of course experiencing New York in the 1930s and so on means that New York is at the time was a way different place than it is now. You know, it was a very hostile place to live in. And since Joseph was this kind of wandering character, you know, wandering about the world and going out and experiencing it, and of course doing so he probably got into trouble a lot, he became like this very streetwise kind of lad. So that translates very well into how he approaches the threats that he's going to face later, which are the Pillar Men. And that's brilliant writing, in my opinion. You know, I think in terms of the character himself, he's a way more interesting character than Jonathan is. Because even though Jonathan, you know, is a very likable character and whatnot, you know, he's a very easy to figure out. But Joseph has more depth into it because of the reasons that I already explained. And that's why it's a little bit more believable that he's able to defeat Straizo when he becomes like corrupt. You know, he becomes like a vampire basically. And even though Joseph has this very, you know, amateur let's say, to put it that way, management of the Hamon, I still think he shouldn't have been able to defeat Straizo just by that. But what makes it believable that Joseph was able to defeat Straizo when he went to hunt him down in that cafe is the streetwise, you know, trickster. I'm planning something. You know, he's like Sinch from Warhammer. He's like he's the schemer kind of, you know, kind of character. He's scheming on top of the scheme that he did before. Like he's scheming on top of on the scheme that is the scheme of the scheme. You know, he's the kind of character that does those kind of things. So that's why it's more believable for Joseph to do the things that he does in that part, or you know, in Battle Tendencies. How he's able to come on top of absolutely more powerful opponents than himself, of course. Now let's talk about Caesar. There's a couple of things that I like about Caesar in terms of who he is as a character and whatnot. First thing is that he's called Caesar. And of course he's this Italian lad. It's called Caesar because I'm guessing that the writers wanted to, you know, add some flair about the Roman Republic or the Roman Empire. Well, Julius Caesar was the first dictator in Roman history, I think. So technically he wasn't the emperor that came after with Augustus. But you know, I'm not gonna go down that road. I'm just saying that it's probably Caesar. It comes from that. You know, it's like an historical fan service, let's say. It certainly worked for me. I love that he was named Caesar, being an Italian lad and whatnot. So, other than that, I think that Caesar has a very interesting progression to his character, because when he is introduced into the anime, I got the sense that he was more of the more savvy, more cold-headed kind of lad. Because first of all, he already had some training, proper training into the Hamon arts with Elizabeth, or Lisa. And he actually becomes sort of a mentor at the beginning to Joseph, you know. He was telling him how to perfect to perfect his Hamon manipulation with the tip of his fingers and whatnot. So at the beginning, Caesar sort of had this aura of not only being sort of a tutor to Joseph, but also he's the character that basically is like his companion, you know, his best friend, and so on and so forth. But also sort of his big brother kind of character, because I'm teaching you things, you know. This is who the Pillar Man is, and whatnot. I went to training already, so I'm going to take you there to take the training, and so on and so forth. Which is interesting because in theory, Speedwagon was like the scholar, like the lad that knew knew more about the Pillar Man, and Speedwagon was, of course, sort of a father figure to Joseph. So the thing is that, of course, Joseph is very juvenile. You know what I mean? He is very immature in many ways, which is actually the thing that gives him the most comedic relief along the second part, Battle Tendencies. But coming back to Caesar, you know, you get that impression first, or at least I did, but then that turns upside down. Absolutely. He becomes like this urgent, let's go and fight. No thoughts, no planning at all. You know, when they are about to face the Pillar Man in that abandoned building, I think it was a church. And I understand why, you know. He was like that because I think at that point either it was Messina or Logins that was killed by one of the Pillar Men, but at the same time he got carried away by his emotions, you know, and he of course evoked the whole thing about his mission and his forefathers doing the same thing. And you know, making the ultimate sacrifice, you know, Zeppeli in the first part, the Zeppeli in the first part sacrificed himself. So I think he felt he needed to do the same thing, but at the same time, it felt like a suicide mission because he wasn't able to defeat the Pillar Man. Or at least Wamuu, he wasn't able to defeat him. He bruised him pretty hard, I'm not gonna lie, but it wasn't enough. So he basically threw his life out like it was a suicide mission because he couldn't control his emotions, and that's like the polar opposite of the first impression that I had from him from the beginning. So I think that change in the character made his story way more interesting. Like he ultimately fell to the passion, you know, to the passions that he felt within himself, like the sense of revenge and also the overwhelmingly desire of doing the bidding of his forefathers, or at least the mission of it, you know, because of course I don't think he was forced or anything to do that, but he took it very seriously, and so much seriously that he made the ultimate sacrifice. He gave his life to try to defeat the Pillar Men. But I still felt like it was like a suicide mission. Like he just threw his life away. Okay, so now let's talk about my second favorite character from Battle Tendencies, which is Stroheim. I think this character is absolutely fantastic, and the first impressions that I got from him was that he was this mad scientist, you know, that he was trying to, of course, get, according to him, of course, which understandably so, I think that would be the case, naively at the end, but yes, the ultimate weapon, you know, for the eventual expansion of Germany at the time. Stroheim, at first I thought he was like a parallelism to Mengele, to a certain degree, you know. But I really like how this character, the progression of this character, because he never ever compromises his goals or ideas. It's not like he was in favor of supporting the Hammond masters just because. He just did it out of necessity, and that's it. He was all about the glory of Germany, you know, the glory of the machine, the war machine of the Germans, in honor of the brilliance engineering, German engineering, and so on and so forth. And we get to see that obviously after, you know, he's blown up, when he sacrifices himself, actually, when he's fighting Santana, when he actually figures out that the Pillar Men are not a weapon to be manipulated, like it's just a toy or whatever. Like they are incredibly powerful, and there is no way you can harness that power. When he realizes this, he sacrifices himself, but he doesn't do it for humanity and whatnot. No. He's basically taking responsibility for the mess and trying to save Germany from Santana, you know, just going out and destroying everything that he built and Germany is trying to build for the oncoming war. So I think it's very interesting that Stroheim actually becomes very helpful in the story of the whole thing, but he doesn't do it for for the reasons that you would want to. You know what I mean? He ultimately wants all the glory and all the power to go towards Germany to aid the country towards the future conflict that was going to unravel, which is, of course, the Second World War. And he was always talking about the brilliance of the German engineering and so on and so forth, so much so that you actually see it reflected when he comes back as a sort of a human half machine kind of Stroheim. Mecha Stroheim. I call him Mecha Stroheim. Also, he was insanely bombastic, you know. He sometimes sounded like a propaganda machine and so on and so forth. So he was so incredibly well written, and the progression of his character, it's very interesting. Again, because he was aiding the Hammond Masters, but it wasn't because he believed in the cause. He did it. Ultimately, he did it for the glory and power of Germany. So that is a real thing, you know. That's something believable. It's not he didn't have like a change of heart like Speedwagon had. This is more believable. Like Stroheim was ultimately doing everything that it was aligned and congruent with his conviction. That's what I'm trying to say. Now let's talk a little bit about Lisa. I had more hopes for her in the sense of the last battle, you know. He was supposed, or well, she did fight Cars at the end like it was planned. But it felt kind of an underwhelming to see her fight against Cars, because I mean, Lisa at the end of the day, I considered her the most powerful Hammond master that we see in the second part. After all, she was the master of Caesar and Joseph. So, you know, I mean, I could understand that you could make the argument that Joseph would eventually become more powerful than Lisa. I could see that coming, but at the same time, I was hoping so much more for Lisa against Cars. I am not so much against Lisa being mortally wounded by Cars in the fight, but it just happened so fast, you know? Cars was able to outwit her so fast. At the same time, it's understandable because Cars is this several millennia old, most powerful Pillarman that there ever was. So of course, him being the ultimate boss, let's say, well, he had the means to trick her, even though she was like maybe the most experienced hammer master that there was in the ultimate fight, you know. But it felt underwhelming because I was looking forward to see Lisa being in action, you know, like fighting to her full power. She was always very on reserve, let's say. But also another thing that I really liked about her is that she's insanely attractive. I think it's probably the most attractive female character, of course, that there is in the first season, at least. That's to my liking, of course. Okay, now let's talk about the Pillarmen, okay? We get the sense of how powerful the Pillarmen, of course, are with Santana, but at the same time, he was like the introduction to who the Pillarmen were. So, if I had to rank the Pillarmen in terms of the power that they had, Santana will be on the bottom. Later would be SCDC. Above him will be Buanu, and the ultimate Pillarman will be, of course, Cars. And we have, an explanation to that in the anime. Like they explained you where the Pillarmen come from and how Cars came to be like the ultimate powerhouse in regards to the Pillarmen. So of course, Cars, it's like they are all kind of demigods to their own power level, but then of course Cars becomes like a little god when he puts the mask on and so on and so forth. But we're going to be talking about that later. What's interesting about Santana is that he's the only surviving Pillar Man, because he gets turned into stone again, but he's not dead. Like, he's technically he is dormant, and I can't remember if he was shipped to the US and they're making studies to the Pillar Man or whatnot. I kind of get that image in my mind that's what happened. AC/DC was defeated, Wamuu was defeated, and oh well, I could say that Cars was not technically defeated. He was paced out. But Santana's still on Earth, and he's very much alive. He's in a stone form. Yes, he's dormant, but he's still alive. So I don't know if that's going to bleed out in the next season of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And I honestly would like to see that. Absolutely. The thing is, of course, that Santana was like the least powerful Pillar Man. So there has to be a way for him to become like a real threat, because, you know, the Hammond Masters, or in this case, Joseph and Lisa, which are the only left ones, because the only ones left, apologies, because Caesar is dead. I think that it has to do something with the coffin that we see at the end of the first season, you know, which is the coffin that was in the boat that was harboring Dio when he was traveling in the boat. So he either gets a mask himself and becomes this insanely powerful Pillar Man, or he's just not going to be a threat at all. So yeah, but that's very interesting in regards to the Santana storyline. So let's see what happens. In terms of the other Pillar Men, there's a very, very specific difference in between them, other than the power level, and it is the code. The code of honor that they have. AC/DC and Wamuu have that. Cars doesn't have that, of course, but you kind of get the sense that all of them have it, because when they were making this arrangement of doing the battle at the Coliseum or whatnot, you know, the ultimate battle, AC/DC and more specifically Wamuu were all about, you know, the code of honor, you know, like facing a real opponent and giving them time and so on and so forth. They had a code of honor and they didn't break that at all. Like it was very ingrained into who they were. And you kind of assumed that Cars have that too, because he didn't oppose the idea, you know? He was like, okay, let's do it. So you assume that he agreed to it because he had the same code of honor, but ultimately we learn that he did it out of... He didn't care. Like he didn't care because he thought all of them were cockroaches, basically. And he was ultimately pleasing the other Pillar Men because it was inconsequential to him. Like, yeah, we're going to fight a teenager and a woman? Fine. Yeah, do whatever you want. Ultimately, they are cockroaches. They are inconsequential to what I want, what I'm trying to achieve. Now, to talk about Cars more specifically, it makes that this is the other character that is written brilliantly, because the only way Cars could have achieved what he achieved as a Pillar Man was by not having that code of honor at all. Cars was the kind of character that would have done anything to achieve the amount of power that he had, which is the thing that he did, ultimately. If some of his brethren some of the Pillarmen threatened his power, he would have been more than glad to terminate him without a single tear, without even thinking about it. He doesn't have any sort of code of honor or whatnot. He will do anything to preserve that position. And that's why he was the most powerful Pillarman. Because he went through millennia doing the same thing. You know, he's the ruthless character. He doesn't care about anything or anyone, or... Well, he of course, he only cares about himself. I shouldn't say that. But he's going to go whatever it takes. He's going to do it. You know what I mean? Even if it comes to erasing his whole race, you know, the Pillarman race, he would have done that. Easy. And one complaint that I had from you know, when the Pillarmen come into the picture, is that I wouldn't have done any sort of arrangement or whatsoever. I said that the humanity had to focus on terminating the Pillarmen to whatever cost possible, because it was too much of a threat. So I wouldn't have considered, like, I don't know, when SCDC kills one, either Logins or Messina, I can't remember which one it was. Like, at that moment, I would have said, okay, get Joseph and get Lisa and get and Caesar and everybody, and let's just terminate this lad. I don't care if it's unfair, if it's 10 against 1, if it is a massive amount of power. There's no honor into, you know, fighting multiple people against one person. No. Too much is at stake. Let's just gank up on them. If we find one alone, let's just gank on him and kill him, and then move on to the another one. That's the kind of approach that I would have had against the Pillarmen, because they were that much of a threat. But that's the only one that has that kind of mindset is Cars. So I think I'm a ruthless bastard at the end of the day. I don't know. But to be fair, in the real world, just imagine having the Pillarman in the real world. You can't leave it to a chance of fighting honorably and whatnot. If you have 20 Hammer Masters against Cars, you're not gonna throw one by one against him. Just gank upon him, because you know what happens at the end? Cars becomes undefeatable to a certain degree. He becomes a god. After Stroheim makes the worst thing ever, you know, which is insanely funny at the same time. You know, when he puts on the mask and he thinks he's killing him with the ultraviolet light and whatnot, and he basically is buffing him up to this godlike figure. And the only way they are able to defeat him but not kill him is just throwing him into space. The only character that has that kind of approach is Cars. Go figure. Now, to finalize my commentary about the characters in the second part, I want to talk about something that pissed me off, which is Messina and Logins, okay? The first impressions that I had from those characters is that first they were going to be very involved in the story from that point forward, and I had the impression that they were like turned Pillarmen, like the Pillarmen that were fighting for humanity. And I thought that was incredibly interesting, you know. Of course, that was all made up in my mind. But the whole idea about that, I found it like very intriguing and very interesting. Only to find out that they were like the most worthless characters in the whole thing. I think they were even more worthless than Speedwagon, because the Speedwagon at least gets kidnapped at the beginning, because of course he has all the knowledge about the Pillarmen and whatnot. But Messina and Logins were so such bad characters, mate. Like, they were thrown out of off a cliff, basically. And the character design, even in the character design, they don't look like disposable characters at all. So I think they missed really badly in you know, making them a disposable characters. They don't do absolutely anything. They are punching bags in the training, and one of them gets killed by SCDC in Italy, and the other one gets kidnapped, but manages to escape. And that's it. That's the whole thing. And I think they could have had a more involved, interesting role into the second part. First of all, because the character design doesn't speak about them being disposable characters. Second of all, they could have been like the good version of Tarkus and Bruford, you know? They could have been that. They could have played that role in the second part, which would have been even more interesting because they would have been the balance of these two supporting characters that were warriors too, but now they are fighting in the good side, let's say. So that would have been incredibly entertaining, incredibly powerful in terms of the story, and if they were like this turncoat pillar men that were fighting for the humanity, that would have been insanely amazing. But anyway, that the fact that those two characters were thrown off a cliff, I think it's a very big flaw, in my opinion. Probably the biggest flaw in the second part, in my opinion. Okay, so to finalize my commentary, I would like to say that probably the strongest selling point, let's say, that this anime has is that indeed it is bizarre. Like, the bizarre in the title of the anime is not there for gratuitous reasons. It is absolutely congruent with what you see in the anime. The anime can be sometimes very gruesome and brutal, you know. You can see babies getting killed and things like that. So yeah, the anime doesn't shy from going towards the gruesome, brutal places, you know. But also, the bizarre things in the anime are, you know, some of the powers. For example, Wamuu with the whole oxygen air kind of manipulation that he had. The Hammond, to a certain degree, is a little bit of a bizarre thing. The way they depict vampires in the anime is, I wouldn't say it's so bizarre, but it's also very different from the common thing, you know, from the already very ubiquitous way of depicting vampires. But also, I'm going to say that the bizarre thing goes even to the music, because the composer or composers, I don't know if it's one or many, they are not doing like the most straightforward thing, which is, okay, if this is going to be in the 30s, maybe we're going to do a little bit of a big band sort of soundtrack, you know, this kind of sort of noir a soundtrack, you know, with the brass and so on and so forth. Maybe some jazz here and there, maybe. You know, they didn't go for that. They went out of the box, absolutely completely out of the box, you know, doing prog rock, doing bro step, and actually mixing those two together. Like I recently did a breakdown for Stardust Crusaders, so in case you want to check that out, I'm gonna leave it in this card right here, but also in the description of this video. And you know, the soundtrack of at least the first season is cosmopolitan. It's like a melting pot of so many different genres and so on and so forth. So the bizarre elements in the anime are not only contained in some of the character powers and so on and so forth. It actually translates in the music too, you know, because it's bizarre that you would think that an anime that is set in this historical place, you know, 1930s and even before that, you know, the late stages of the 19th century coming into the 20th century, would have these kinds of songs playing on top of it. So I think that's one of the most interesting and refreshing, I would say, parts of the anime, the selection of the music that there is. But before I go, I would like to invite you to check my newest merch, which is inspired by Berserk and Dark Souls. This is one of the t-shirts that I have available, and I also have this hoodie right here, which is one of the many colors that I have available, which I gotta tell you that the quality of this hoodie and the t-shirt feels amazing. By making a purchase, you have the chance to be featured in one of my videos. The only thing you have to do is take a picture with what you bought on and send it to the contact email that is in the description of this video, and you have a chance to be featured in the intro of one of my videos, alright? Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and share it with your friend. Also, please don't forget to visit my Patreon, my Ko-fi profile, and my Ko-fi store in case you want to support my work further, and my Teespring merch shop. And of course, ex nihilo nihil fit.